Whatever you'd like to start with. We can go from the top if you'd like, or we could start from whatever you'd like to have questions with.
Well, so for question one, right?
Hmm.
Um, Coming into this, it didn't give the vectors, so I'm just assuming I'm starting with the vector at the 0, 0, and the one is
Are you talking about
so
like
like
the I's and J's
the
and
i's and
K's?
j's, yeah, as 1 and 0. What I'm using here, like
Right.
if it's an I, okay, so
So just as a reminder, I, J, and K are they're sort of like proper nouns. They're sort
right,
of specific things for the X, Y, and Z axis. So just to give you a quick correspondence, if I draw the X, Y, Z axis like this, X, Y, and Z,
yes,
right? So your standard right-handed coordinate system. Do you know what that means,
right,
by the way, as opposed to a
yeah,
left-handed coordinate system?
the thing with the thumb and everything,
Yeah,
yes, yeah,
exactly, right? Like your fingers start out in this direction, and then you
right,
curl them. You start that out at X, and then you curl your fingers towards Y, and your right hand thumb, that's a really big thumb, is pointing up at Z. Whereas if it was your left hand, it would be pointing downwards instead. But
right,
this was something that, for some reason, like the first time I saw this, this blew my mind. And in retrospect, I don't understand why, because it's so simple looking at it backwards. But it really is just a convention. Um, your X and Y, are sort of your first two orientations. And, the Z can either be up or down. And you just have to
right,
do an arbitrary choice of whether you want the positive to be up or positive to be down. And because most people are right-handed, they chose positive to be up to be consistent with your right hand as opposed to left.
right. I mean, that makes sense.
Right. So the point I was getting at here is when they say I plus J or, cross I, cross J,
Right.
those typically just mean so I hat. Uh,
Yep.
it's weird that they're using arrows instead of hats, but it's kind of the same idea. So
It
I
is.
is essentially, a vector going in the X direction.
Right.
J is something going in the Y direction, and K is something going in the Z direction.
Right.
And what they're saying here is basically, what do you call it? What they're doing here is they're basically telling you, okay, if you add them together a little bit and cross them again, you sometimes will end up with, like, for example, I cross J will give you K,
Mhm.
right? So like
Right.
X, Y, and Z. This, if you can imagine, maybe I should use a camera instead of a virtual whiteboard. But the pattern is sort of I, J, K,
Mhm.
J, K, I, and K, I, J. Can you see how it's kind of like they call this cyclic? Do you see this
Yeah.
pattern? I, J, K, J, K, I, K, I, J,
Yeah. Yep.
right? And what this basically means is, X, sort of looking back at the geometry back here, it's like X cross Y gives you Z. Sorry, or in terms of the IJK, I cross J gives you K. And what it's asking you here is to apply these rules. And notice that a lot of the time you're going to get zeros because I cross I, like anything crossed itself is going to be equal to 0. This is always true.
Okay.
Because the cross product is essentially saying, how do you put it? It takes, how should I put it? The cross product, when you take something and, when you take a vector X and another vector that's parallel to X, so this is my vector X and the little cross sign means the cross product. So hopefully this notation isn't too confusing. But
Yeah, I got.
if ever you cross X with itself, just multiplied by some scalar K, so K is just a stretching or shrinking, right? So
Okay.
if ever you have like a vector X and a vector Kx, and keep in mind K could be negative to make it point in the opposite direction, but still parallel, this is equal to 0. This comes from the definition. This is part of the motivation, I think, for the cross product,
Okay.
where whereas the dot product is sort of saying things that are in the same direction will spit out a large value. The cross product is saying the things in the same direction will spit out 0. Does that motivation kind of jive with what you've learned so far?
Yeah, I mean, it does. You did teach that,
Right.
and that was in the base foundation. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's something helpful to keep in mind as you go along. But what we could do is we could perhaps in this, for the sake of not trying to answer specific homework questions, I could come up with maybe one or two examples of my own and try to get the point across here. But
Sure, but, I can
sure.
tell you just what the problem so I hit this problem, I
Hmm.
hit 1A, right?
Sure.
And so I'm looking at this. Now I'm aware and I've done the matrix and I understand that in the vacuum. So, but I hit this and now I'm confused about what,
Yeah,
formulas to use.
I
So
see
my
what you're
first
saying.
issue would be, I need reminders of which formulas I'm using
Yeah.
where.
So
My
very reasonable question. So let me say something. If you really wanted to crunch this problem out, you could represent I as 1, 0, 0. So basically
Sure.
just a component in the x direction and 0 in the others. And
Okay.
similarly for j, like if you really wanted to do just everything out completely computationally, this is what you would do. 0, 0, 1. And you could just add these together, cross them, what have you, and that would give you the right answer. But that's computationally kind of bullheaded, kind of stubborn, right? And the idea behind, I think, the spirit of this problem is that there's going to be shortcuts we can do that are both simpler and also help us kind of see, understand, and use the properties of the cross product. So that's the direction I would point us towards, rather than explicitly calculating everything. Are you cool with that?
Okay.
Right. So what
Right.
I'm going to say instead is, uh, just give me 1 second. I want to just double check that we're properly recording. Yeah, I think we're good. So instead of that, there are some other properties that we want to talk to you about. The cross product, unless I'm severely misremembering, still has a lot of the basic properties from some, but not all of the basic properties of multiplication that you're familiar with from elementary and high school. Um,
Right.
and what I mean by this, you know, that might seem like an unreasonably simple, maybe even condescending statement, but that really is the kind of deeper motivation. Is that whereas we had, multiple addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division for regular numbers, in multivariable calculus, we kind of want to come up with the corresponding operations for vectors. Now, addition and subtraction makes sense, right? Because any vector, you just take the x, y, and z component and just add them up with the other vectors, x, y, and z components, right? Not too bad,
Right.
right? And subtraction is basically the same thing as addition. You just subtract instead. But now multiplication is where things get kind of complicated. And that's why they invented the dot product and the cross product. So I think what these questions are kind of asking you to do is use the fact that the cross product still has commutivity. Sorry, excuse me, not commutivity. It has distributivity and associativity. So what I mean by that is if you had something like a plus b, vectors a plus b, and you cross that by c, right? This is equal to a cross c plus b cross c. This is distributivity. Sorry, my handwriting is terrible under normal circumstances, and it's also
You're
pretty
good.
bad.
I can
But
definitely see it though.
this is the kind of the key here for the first problem, right? Because I'm not going to use the exact same problem. I'm going to cook up perhaps something of my own. But if I got something like j cross, excuse me, if I had something like j cross j, right? This is going to spit out a 0 value. Remember?
Yeah.
And the
Yep.
idea here behind the first problem is that you're kind of doing a little bit of addition, right? But you're multiplying it by something afterwards, right? And the idea is, what if you do the multiplication first by distributing and see if you get any zeros out of that to simplify it? Do you see where I'm getting with this?
Um, a little. I'm just not sure what how that relates to the actual homework problem. I mean, I'm following you with what
Sure,
you're
sure,
doing,
sure.
but
So I'm going to cook up a different example just to make sure that's I'm using my own inventions rather than
sure.
something else. But let's say we're doing something like k cross j.
Okay.
Excuse me. Adding k plus j crossed with um, let's say crossing with j, right?
Okay.
So again, I forgot to do the cross symbol, but this is equal to k cross j plus j cross j. And remember what I was saying earlier was that whenever you see j anything crossed with itself, that's just a big fat zero. So all you're left with
Okay.
is this term, which is a lot simpler.
Okay, so we're just doing FOIL method, like old school
Kind
base
of, right?
algebra sort of stuff, right? Putting on the rules and kind of keeping the proper nouns of it.
Right.
But
Now,
but
one thing I want to keep in mind is a lot of the times in FOIL, you would, how do I put it? When you did like x plus one, like in regular algebra, right? So regular algebra, like high school, x plus one, when you FOILed it, you would get x squared plus x plus one, right? And then you would look at yourself and you'd say, oh, x plus x, that's just x squared plus 2x plus
yeah,
1,
tracking.
right? But over
Right.
here, you need to be really careful because subliminally, what really happened here was this x was x times 1, and this x was 1 times x. And in regular algebra, those are the exact same thing,
Makes sense.
right? But in with a cross product, a cross b is not necessarily equal to b cross a. It might be, but not always. You don't have that guarantee anymore, so you got to be careful.
Right. I guess where I started to get confused with A is that it had 3 steps if we were using like traditional,
Sure.
FOIL out. And I wasn't sure at some point, do I plug in the vector number itself for
Ah,
I or K at a middle step, or am I multiplying it
uh,
all the way through?
I would say keep it with since it gave you I, J, and K, keep it that way for as long as you can. Just based on what I'm seeing, I'm not sure exactly how the portal accepts answers. Maybe
Sure.
it wants it in terms of like,
It does.
components.
I had to go through the hints to check this, but it does want it as in terms of components, and I guess that's kind of where I got a little
So
confused with
does it
the
want
homework.
so it wants it in terms of like something like this rather than in terms of I,
It
J, and
seems
K?
It seems so, because when I went through the hints, you said, "He help me with this," and it'll walk you through it,
Mhm.
or even a practice a similar one. Yeah, it seems it wants it in that number format, in vector
Okay,
format.
that's fine. So what I would encourage you to do is because all of this for now is I's, J's, and K's. I would recommend you to stick to it for as long as you can, and then
Right.
for as long as you can, and then maybe at the very end, turn it into a straight up set of coordinates like this.
Okay.
Now, there's one more detail that I didn't quite tell you earlier
Yes.
that I think is good to remind you. But so I cross J is equal to K,
Right.
right? Can you tell me what J cross I is going to be equal to? And you can try to play around with the right hand rule to see if you can figure this out. But that's just basically saying, point your fingers out in the J direction first, curl them in the I direction, and tell me where your right thumb is pointing.
Downward, so negative K?
Exactly. You got it. You got
Oh,
it.
okay,
Your
okay,
spatial
cool,
intuition
cool.
is great. Yeah. Yeah, you got that in a flash. So J cross I is equal to negative K, right?
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
And
see that.
similarly, uh, for these ones as well, if instead of J cross K is equal to I, if you swapped it in the other order, you would get a negative sign,
Right.
right? And
Yep.
I think with these tools together, that should cover just about everything you need. Just remember to start with the inner parentheses and work outwards.
Right.
And if you have a constant in ahead, like a value of 10 or 20, or any constant value, it how do I say it behaves kind of like you'd expect from normal algebra. You kind of
Yes,
just carry that value through.
a scalar, right?
Yeah, exactly, a scalar. Just
Okay.
gotcha. Just wanted to. I wasn't sure if you'd been introduced to that term, but like
Sure.
50 times I, or instead of I, let me just because I, J, K are the special
It's yeah.
coordinate vectors. Maybe if instead I just said an arbitrary X, or sorry, maybe like an arbitrary vector A crossed with an arbitrary vector B, right?
Right.
Is just equal to 50 times A cross B. Basically, just like
I
you would expect, like you would hope,
Right.
right?
That
So with
you
this
can
in
move a
mind,
constant out front.
let me try to come up with maybe what do you call it? Like maybe like an omnibus problem, something that
Okay.
hopefully involves a little bit of everything.
Well, it seems like there's 5 different kinds here, but I think if you throw one at me and I get it, I think I might. Well, yeah, whatever you want, throw it at me.
Okay, sure. Um, plus maybe 10J crossed with how do I want to do this? Let's say crossed with 2K crossed with J. Does this cover everything we need? Um, yeah, okay. I think this
It's
covers close to
close.
everything, right?
Can I talk this problem out with you because
Please do.
this is where I get a little where I have some problems. So
Sure.
we work internals, right? So the 2K crossed with J,
Hmm.
it becomes 2K cross J, right?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that as the first simplifying step. So 2k cross j.
Right. I don't know if I'm doing this the right steps, and that would be the same. Well, with
Well,
the
with over here,
plus,
we can't simplify it as
we can't,
much.
right?
Right.
Yeah. So we just have that. So
Right.
this is where I get a little confused on where in the like order of operations I'm supposed to go from here.
Gotcha. So I would say at this point, I would recommend doing a little bit of simplification because k cross j is going to be one of the other. It's going to be ijk, maybe positive, maybe
Right.
negative, but there's some opportunity for simplification, right? That's what I'd recommend doing. Now, if this over here, like because they're both, kind of this is a parentheses and this is a parentheses, right? They're kind of, in terms of order of operations, they're on equal footing. It's
Yeah.
just that I'm focusing on this one because we can simplify it, whereas this one we
Right.
kind of can't until we do some distributing.
Makes sense. And
Okay.
so the K and KJ,
Hmm.
how do I
Yeah.
figure out again if it's negative I or
Play around
positive
with your right
I?
hand. That's
Play with my
what it always is, right? So X, Y, Z. This is your right hand coordinate system, and
right,
instead I'm just going to straight up call it I, J, K at this point, right?
right.
So play around. When you do K cross J, where does your
If you
right thumb point?
if I mean, I don't know.
Huh?
See, this is where am I supposed to just do it normal with the normal IJK? I because it's positive, right?
So I'm not quite sure. So this is the positive I direction, and this is the negative I direction, right? Um, Whereas this is the J direction, and this is the negative J direction, and similarly for K.
Right, but if it's K cross J, how do I start that problem?
Okay, K cross J. So my recommendation is, okay, so the right hand rule, right? Do you like
Right.
using your entire hand and curling it, or do you like using the three fingers? There's kind of two.
Oh, I
Uh,
didn't know there was a difference. I just saw the
it's like this
little
exact same
diagram. It said
idea.
throw
It's
your hand.
just some people have a preference for one. Like this is almost like a mnemonic. Um,
Right.
damn, I wish I had a camera. But the idea is take. So the one I like to do is take your four, your four non thumb fingers, and
Okay.
start that in the K direction. That's your first one, right? So that's your four
Okay.
fingers,
So
right?
the first one is where you point your fingers towards.
Yes, exactly. And then the second one is where you curl them towards. So if you start off curling in the K direction and you sort of like curl them down into
Downwards.
this direction, right? Where does your right thumb point at that point?
What the a positive I.
Hmm? Is it
Oh, see, maybe
K
I have
and
this
J?
wrong. So my fingers are straight up, right?
Straight up,
Going,
yep.
and then I'm curling them down into a fist, right?
Yes, you're curling them down into a fist.
So the finger points point back at J, right? Then my
Uh,
thumb is pointing towards me. If I have a knife hand in front of me, right, and I have my fingers going straight up and they curl downwards
okay, I'm
to
gonna
to
I'm
my
gonna
left.
use a slightly more detailed picture, right? So let
Okay,
me do it this way. So let's how do I do this? So if this is okay, so I'm gonna this is the exact same coordinate system. I'm just sort of rotating it to make it super clear. But
sure.
this is I,
Yeah.
right? This is J,
Okay.
right? And this is sort of like your it's sort of your X and your Y that you're used to from one-dimensional
Yeah. You
calculus,
you can rotate all those. I'm pretty good with the spatial stuff
right?
on that point.
So
Yeah,
then
okay.
using some organic chemistry notation, I'm going to say that this wedge over this shaded in wedge over here
Okay.
means that the this is what's coming out towards the page,
Right.
right? And this is the positive K direction. This is K
Okay.
is equal to Z, right? And the other notation is the wedges, where this is negative K is equal to negative Z,
Right.
right? So the K or Z axis is coming towards us right now,
Right.
right? So now I'm saying, okay, start with your fingers pointing towards us, and then
Okay.
curl them upwards. Curl them, and curl them sort of.
So how would I do that? I would have to turn my hand all the way upside down so it's
Yeah.
palm up. but I would have to do it right hand. We are talking right hand,
Yeah,
right?
we are talking right hand. Damn, I
So that
really
means
wish I had just like a camera.
I have to turn around and point that towards my chest, right? So
Yeah,
the
so
fingers
exactly. Take your right
are
hand,
touching my chest,
point your four
touching my
fingers
chest,
towards your chest,
right?
right?
Okay. And
Now, you don't get to move your wrist, right? You don't get to move your wrist. You're only allowed to move your fingers.
I don't think my arm bends that way, man. Okay, but I get your
Yeah.
point.
But
Okay,
now,
so
okay, you got your four fingers pointing towards your chest,
okay,
and now you curl them upwards towards the ceiling.
sure.
Now is your thumb pointing to the left or to the right?
Let's point to the left.
Okay, I agree. It is pointing to the left, right? Your thumb is pointing towards the left. This is the thumb. So is
Okay.
that positive eye or negative eye?
That's negative eye.
It is negative eye. Yes, exactly. So you just gotta
I'm gonna have to play around with that concept. I'll
exactly.
be
You gotta
honest.
play around with it and make sure your
I
signs are
thought
right.
I had it, but I think I only have it when it's
Yeah, no.
rotated
The
the
funny thing is,
traditional
I
way.
know some really bright people, some really smart people who, for their life of them, cannot remember which one is their left hand, right hand.
I
Um,
know.
it's really odd. I've never had a problem with it once I understood it, but I had one friend in high school who um, would what was his thing? He would always use his left hand, but would always make an error and have two negative signs that canceled out and managed to get the right answer usually. It
Yeah,
was very
sometimes you
funny.
gotta fail your way to succeed. So
Yes, but this is something you
okay,
want to play around with. But let's continue with the example, okay?
yeah, yes, please.
So
Sorry.
we concluded that k cross j is equal to negative I. So let's replace that. So k cross j is equal to negative I, right? So now we
Right.
have 5i plus 10j crossed with 2 negative I.
Okay, I'm tracking up to this point.
Okay, gotcha. So now we do a little bit of foiling. In fact, it's foiling is when you have like a plus b times c plus d, but this
Right.
term only has one thing now. So, it's not even as complicated as foiling. It's regular distribution, right?
You even with okay, so the constants, the scalars still act like constants, even
Yes.
with it, whether it's I or J. And
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
okay, so so I'm coming out with what, like a negative 10 I squared plus 10
Oh, hold
a
on, hold
negative.
on.
Okay,
Let's
sorry,
one at a time, right? And don't use squared for right now because the concept of
sure,
squaring, um,
right, yep, because it's I times I. Sorry,
well, hold on.
yeah,
With a cross product, squaring doesn't. We just don't really talk about squares when it comes to cross products. Um,
right,
you'll see why in a moment. Because, well, the real reason is because when something is squared by cross product, it's basically zero. So,
right,
just say zero, right?
yeah, right,
But let's just one at a time break this down, right? So
sure, yeah.
5i times negative 2i, essentially. What does that give us?
So negative 10 I times I.
Negative 10i. Yeah, cross I. Sorry, I used the
Cross
word
I,
times. I
sorry,
should have said cross
sorry,
to be explicit,
cross, yeah,
right?
my bad,
And
cross,
we're
yeah,
going to be able to do some simplification with this later, but let's hold on for that and just say,
right,
what does
right.
10j and negative 2i give us? This
It
becomes
will
minus
negative,
20j
right,
cross I.
right,
And this becomes, what is I cross I?
0.
0. Yes.
That's the rule.
And you can kind of see this as well. Well, can you see this? Yeah, no.
Yeah,
Yeah, I cross I is basically just 0 by definition.
right,
There's no need to try to figure out how that works with your right hand. Just it's 0. Uh,
yeah, it's
right. The
0.
right
Yeah,
hand rule
yep,
kind of only works for non-zero things. Um,
yeah, sure.
but what you're left with is minus 20 j cross I, but we ought to be able to simplify this further, right?
Right.
Because j cross I, that's something. What is that? Let's look at our
That's
diagram over here. What is j
yeah,
cross I?
right. So it's going to be K, whether it's positive or K or negative K. I'll spend 20 minutes just trying to figure this out.
Right.
And
Well,
yeah, so
start off, point your fingers in the direction of the first thing, which is j.
K, right,
Curl them in the direction of I, right? So now the question is your thumb coming into the page or coming out of the page or into the page? So this is out and this is in.
I mean, like, this is I'm gonna get real kind of frustrated at this. Like negative K. I don't know. I mean, I'm like right now, my brain is
Sure.
frying itself.
Don't trust your brain right now. Trust your hand, right?
I am. I have no idea which way to point it. Like, so I'm pointing. I know that I'm pointing it towards J, but which way your hand is flipped is very important, and I don't know which way
Oh,
it
I
gets
see what you're
flipped.
saying.
So,
So let me put it this way. You're staring at this on a screen, right?
yeah, yeah,
Consider the screen. Um, so how do I want to put it? Like, just orient it as close to the screen as possible, right? So like
Right.
at the start when yeah, like I kind of know what you mean. I used to struggle with this too, but once I got used to it, I guess I just never thought about it again. But like starting off, put your like four fingers just sort of how do I put it?
Well, so they go straight up, right? Because I'm using your diagram right
Yeah,
here, right? So I got I going up, and I got
like think about
I
I
got
and
J.
J literally being part of the screen, right?
Right,
But then
yeah. So I
K
got
and comes in or out.
right. So I got J going up, and I got I going to the right, and then I
Right.
got K coming at me, right? So I stick my fingers straight up in the air, but the problem is I'm either flipping my hand facing the right or facing the left, and that's where I get a little confused
Gotcha.
about
Well, to be specific, I is to the right. Positive I is to
right.
the right. So
And
it's
you've
upwards.
so okay.
Your fingers start upwards, and then they curl to the right. So where is your thumb pointing?
Well, so is it where they start curling or where they end? So if they start curling and they start going to the right, then my thumb is pointed away from the screen, so it's a negative K, right?
Away from the screen as an into or outwards?
Into the screen,
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So J cross I is negative K,
negative K. Okay.
right? So that turns into minus 20 times
I'm
negative
just
K.
gonna have to play with that. I'm just gonna have to play with that
Yeah, no,
over
I
and
get
over
you.
until I get it.